case of Richard Sharp drew a lot of attention when it first broke more than a decade ago. Sharp was a wealthy, Harvard-educated dermatologist who lived on the North Shore. In 2000, he was accused of killing his wife, Karen Sharp, whose family mourned very publicly as Richard Sharp's trial unfolded.
Karen Sharp was a loving mother, the best sister anybody could have. She was a wonderful daughter and a friend.
And one of the most sensational aspects of the case that drew even more public attention was Richard Sharp's history of dressing up as a woman. Sharp was convicted of his wife's murder in 2001 and sentenced to life in prison. He was later acquitted of charges of trying to hire a hitman to kill the prosecutor in his first trial. And he twice tried to commit suicide, ultimately succeeding in 2009. My guest tonight is a woman who went through much of this at Sharp's side as his friend. And she's since authored the book, Cornered: Dr. Richard J. Sharp as I Knew Him. Linda DeFruscio joins me now. Linda, welcome to Greater Boston.
Hi.
So how did
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Pleasure.
It's an honor and a privilege.
Well, it's quite a story
really
that you had to tell. How did you meet Richard Sharp?
I met him through business, and that's how I got to know him, through work. And I met him, and I had written an article, and then when I wrote this article, he read it in a magazine.
You're an electrologist, right?
I'm a registered electrologist for 40 years.
So you do hair removal, and he came to see you under a pseudonym, right?
Yes, exactly.
Why did he not want you to know his real name when he first came to see you?
He wanted me to just take him as a client and treat him, and just his needs were some ingrown hairs on his neck, and he wanted me to take care of his problem, and he came in as Chris.
So how then, after he came to see you with a made-up name, how did you end up becoming friends with him? You tell one story in the book of this crazy car ride that you took with him in a brand new Porsche up to his home in Gloucester.
Right, exactly. Well, we had a lot in common. We liked dermatology, and I loved talking about the skin, and I would talk to patients at the beginning of their consultation about their skin. And he liked to hear what I was saying, and he seemed to take an interest in what I was saying, and then I knew he was paying attention, and he seemed to get onto your level, and he could understand everything so nicely, and that made me more interested in listening to him as a
hints
person.
a little bit at the answer to my next question, but the negative side of Richard Sharp has been pretty extensively documented in the media. I'm wondering, you talked about his ability to listen to you, to get on your level. What are other attributes of Richard Sharp that you wanted to bring to the fore in this book?
Well, I wanted to save some of his humanity, because he was really a really brilliant doctor, and he was my mentor, and looking beyond, if you will say, into his career, that he eventually, later on, he opened up 18 affiliate offices.
And you actually ended up going into business with him, right?
Yes, he formed a consortium of 18 offices, and I was one of them. And he would try to help people who didn't know. He was very innovative, and he could predict the future. He could see what was going on, and he tried to get all these electrologists to come on board with him, and this would help him in his retirement.
So you talk about his ability in the book, and here with me now, his ability to look into the future business-wise when it came to his own business and dermatology. You also talk in the book about getting stock tips from him. He would tell you, okay, you invest this much and then sell this particular stock. The company's about to hit a hard stretch, right?
Right. Also, we talked about stocks, but getting back to the laser, I just wanted to tell you that he would help the people who didn't have the money to buy a laser, so he brought in his 2 lasers to our business.
This is a laser to do the sort of electrological, if that's the right term, work for what you did, right?
And back, in the late 1990s is when, like 1999, is when the lasers were coming out, and he could see that there was big money in that.
All right, so we're talking about all, as you described them, the fine traits of this man who was convicted of this horrific, brutal act, the murder of his wife. The jury rejected the notion that Richard Sharp was insane when he killed his wife, but you suggest in your book that the insanity defense may have had some merit. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a bunch of things about that. In terms of, I think he knew he was going to be in for life, but he would have liked to have seen it to be a lesser degree of sentencing, like second-degree murder, even though he knew that he was going to be in for a while.
So that would explain why. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. At the time of the crime, when it happened, I had many, many discussions with him. I spoke to his lawyers, and I had to come to some truth about this story, because knowing him as such an unbelievable, brilliant doctor, to see this happen, I had to understand the story. So.
And you actually are very careful in the book, we should say, to say, all right, the narrative I'm laying out here, I'm going to tell you how Richard Sharp described what was happening to me, the erosion of his marriage, his desire to stay with his wife. I think you talk about him going to the house when there was a restraining order taken out against him on the night that he killed her. And as you describe it, he described to you blacking out, right? That's my recollection from the book.
When he
murdered his wife.
Okay, there's a few things to that as well.
Sure.
So when that happened, he did not really remember hurting her. He remembers the gun going off. To my knowledge, to my understanding, he did not cock the gun. And he didn't intentionally try to hurt her.
How did your decision, when he went to prison, you describe in the book having a moment where you think, okay, I should not actually continue my relationship with Richard Sharp now that he's been convicted of killing his wife.
It was really difficult.
Okay, so why'd you do it?
It was really difficult to be his friend after, and I think in most circumstances, when somebody does something wrong, there's a fine line, and that is, should I be his friend or should I not be his friend? But you have to remember, I had no control of my life, and my life was going in a direction that I couldn't predict what was going on in my own life.
We should mention you've had
my father's been in prison since I was at least 3, and so I was familiar with prisons, unlike others, and not many people would visit the prison because they're afraid. So in that, you know, should the schools have some kind of program to visit the courts, to visit the prison systems when you're younger, so that you wouldn't want to end up there? And if we had more of that, it's possible that we'd have less crime. All
right, Linda DeFruscio, we have to leave it there. Thank you for coming in, and it's a fascinating book.
Thank you.